that's where I come from, is that very conscious conceptual base to a body of work and then organizing it visually and trying to get people to pay attention to the little things in the photographs. At this lecture I did back at the college, one of my favorite panoramic photographs is there's a young couple on frame right, and they're holding hands. They're obviously very happy, very much in love, very much filled with that lustful young energy. And on frame left is the three sets of ladies' underpants. And on one of the underpants is written, "Don't ever stop." And I had to point that out to my audience at the college because I don't think it was perceptible from the projection. But that kind of thing is important. And I try to stress to people, look, read, understand what's trying to be communicated here.
Welcome to the Hidden City Podcast. I'm Grant.
And I'm Doug, and we're here to share some of the incredible stories and people from Oak Cliff that you might not know.
We're going to sit down with some of the visionaries, craftsmen, and business owners who have shaped Oak Cliff into what it is today.
Oak Cliff is on the south bank of the Trinity River, a few miles south of downtown Dallas. While technically it was part of Dallas, it was its own city for a long time, and it still has that independent spirit.
We'll dive into the history and the spirit of this place, exploring the different challenges and successes that defined it.
This is The Hidden City, a podcast about the people and the stories that make Oak Cliff extraordinary. Welcome to this episode of the Hidden City Podcast. Today we are so excited to have Richard Doherty with us, who is the author of Framing Oak Cliff. It's a visual diary of a Dallas neighborhood. It just got released and it is amazing. Richard has been doing photography in Dallas for 40 years and has been in the neighborhood capturing and telling its story, and has been a professor from LSU to Tarrant County, and we're just excited to have him on the show with us today. So welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
This is great. One of the first questions we want to throw at you is, after living in Oak Cliff for so many decades, how's your perspective on the neighborhood shaped your photography?
Well, my work has always been diaristic and drawn from personal experience. Wherever I've lived in my life, growing up in Little Rock, Arkansas, living in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where the university was, in Chicago, when I lived there for 3 years, and in Baton Rouge, everywhere I go, I look around. And my work is just about observing and recording what I think is significant. And it's often very banal stuff, but it means something to me. And my goal seems to be to try to make sense of the chaos that is our daily life. And I've always done that wherever I've lived. Oak Cliff had to be infected with me. Yeah. But when I moved here, I was going to photograph in this neighborhood. Yeah. And it's a lot of the reason we moved to Oak Cliff when we came to Dallas was because of the unique landscape, because of the unique socioeconomic landscape here. It was affordable. Yeah. And we just loved it.
Yeah, photography is in your bones, it seems like.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's. I did freelance photography for about 7 years, and then my brother Grant, who you know, and then my wife opened up a photo studio, and we got to just be around that a ton. So I worked for a newspaper as a photojournalist, and seeing and flipping through this book. Just you could tell you've got a love for the craft, but then also your neighborhood. And so, yeah, I'm so curious, like, what drew you to, you said Oak Cliff was the multiculturalism, but then also the, like, affordability, that it felt different than Dallas. What are some more of those things that kind of, those characteristics that you've seen?
Well, first and foremost, my wife worked. My wife was a food scientist, and she worked for Quaker Oats. She worked for Southland Corporation. She worked for TCBY Yogurt as a VP for research, and she had a job at one of the plants in Oak Cliff when we first moved here. When we first moved here to take my job at Tarrant County College, we lived in Oak Lawn because I did not want to live in the suburbs of Fort Worth. Yeah. And she was driving back home to our little apartment in Oak Lawn from Oak Cliff, and there was a traffic jam on 35. And so she had to cut through the neighborhood. So she cut through on North Edgefield Avenue saw this little brick bungalow and said, yeah, you know, I think we could live here. And that was the moment. And we went back that evening, looked at that house, called the realtor, made an appointment, and the house was ours.
Wow.
That's the story. And we bought at the very limit of our credit availability. And that house cost us $90,000.
That's amazing.
Which sounds cheap.
No,
Changed a little bit.
Yeah,
since-
it wasn't cheap
since
in
then.
1983 to
Yeah.
a college professor, but
Well,
it worked.
Since the 80s, I mean, when you moved in the 80s, what was life like here in Oak Cliff?
Very quiet, very beautiful, and bucolic. It was so green and so lush and so hilly, and it was lovely, a lovely place to be. When we moved in to North Edgefield Avenue, we were the youngest couple on the block. Everybody else was then my age, my age now.
Yeah.
So we were the young ones, and of course, that was a big advantage. We did not like the hustle bustle of North Dallas, didn't like that scene. The world of conspicuous consumption has never been of interest to me or my wife, who hails from Dallas. She's a B.A. Bear, 1970. And she never even came to Oak Cliff when she was growing up because
Yeah.
you don't want to go there. It's
Yeah.
dangerous.
Yeah.
It's the wrong side of the river.
That was our experience. I mean, we grew up in East Dallas,
Yeah.
and never
never
really
came.
spent a lot of
Yeah.
time here until later in life. But
Well, the river has been the natural dividing line between the north and the southwest part of the city, and that's one of the reasons why Oak Cliff wasn't molested by the developers any sooner than it has been.
Yeah, you said, I think in one of the essays wrote, as long as there's the river, it's going to be divided.
That's Bill Minutaglio.
Yeah.
But it was the 80s and 90s when a lot of that development, major population growth was happening north of the river. You just said that, Oak Cliff was shielded in some ways from that during those 2 decades. So that was about the time you were first living here. Yeah. What was the vibe of Dallas to Oak Cliff back then?
It was still, back then my wife's family was still around, and they would say, when we told them we were going to buy a house in Oak Cliff, my brother-in-law said, that's a mistake.
Yeah.
You just don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But just because of it has a reputation as, it's just the wrong part of the city. You want to move, you want to move to Plano, or you want to move to Carrollton, someplace nice and someplace new.
Yeah.
But that just wasn't our aesthetic at all.
We've heard that a couple times on the show.
I'm sure you've heard it much.
When people are like, yeah, we're going to plant and put our roots in here. And they're like, what are you doing? Some family members calling them to tell them not to. And,
Yeah, that's right.
that's kind of what I do if someone tries to go to Plano now.
It's funny. We've had our little piece. It's called Kessler Square up there between Colorado and Davis.
Yeah.
And a lot of people that move into the neighborhood on the street, they come from Boston or New York or San Francisco, and they love it. They say the realtors tried to show them Plano or Carrollton or even Highland Park.
Yeah.
And they said, no, this is more like a real city.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's interesting too, the friends we had in the 90s when we decided to have kids after we moved into this neighborhood, because we thought, well, gee, we've got this house now. It's got 3 bedrooms. And we were in our 30s and thought, well, let's try this. And so we had 2 kids. Awesome. They went to the public schools, Rosemont Elementary, which is walking distance from the house. At that time was divided equally between black, Hispanic, and white. And we thought, man, this is great.
Yeah.
This is how the world looks.
Right.
As opposed to being sequestered in some suburban enclave. So it all worked out.
That's amazing.
We just got very lucky and had some very great neighbors who were raising kids at the same time. My across the street neighbor, who appears in the book, is a fellow named Dan Peraro, who does the cartoon strip Bizarro.
Oh, yes, of course.
And he had 2 girls, and we had a boy and a girl, and they were fast friends. And so we had a lot of good times with the Peraros and others that were in the neighborhood that supported the public schools and wanted to be an active part of the neighborhood. And that's what it's like-minded folks.
Yeah, it feels That's so cool hearing that. We grew up reading Bizarro, and I was dumbfounded when I found out he was from Oak Cliff, or spent some time here.
He's from Tulsa, but
Tulsa,
he spent a long time here. He's now in Mexico.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I love it. I love the like-minded people that are drawn to this place too.
Sure.
So jumping into some of the photography, I know you had some choices in this book, and maybe this is your work over time, but black and white, doing more of the panoramas, it seemed like, is a style choice. What other style choices came to mind when you think of this body of work that you've kind of put together over these years?
I've always used a bunch of different cameras,
Yeah,
and it's funny because the camera or the work at hand kind of dictates the tool that you want to use. That work on Jefferson Boulevard, which I still haunt Jefferson Boulevard and still photograph there. But at the time, the street scene was a lot more bustling, as the photographs evidence. And I bought a panoramic camera to work on Jefferson Boulevard. I didn't keep it but for about 5 or 6 years because I kind of, I said, well, I've done enough with this. So it really worked because I could walk with that camera. It gave me an expansive view. That camera covers 130 degrees horizontally. And you can photograph surreptitiously. You can make photographs that people don't understand they're being included in. And that was very important to me because most of the photographs, the panoramic work, is just candid photography. And if there is interaction with the subject, it's usually very obvious. But I like that tool for describing an urban landscape. It kind of gets everything in there, and it's a very interesting way to deal with the space. I also used 8x10 view cameras and 4x5 view cameras and handheld medium format cameras. Just depending on what I was doing. You can't walk very far with an 8x10 view camera.
Yeah.
You got to park somewhere and haul the 50 pounds of gear where you want to go. You need to know where you're going with that thing.
And it's also, I think I read in the book too, it's even a conversation starter. It's like people are intrigued. They're like, what is this thing?
It's a great Diane Arbus always said that the camera is a license. And if it's a camera like that, it's really interesting to people because no one sees these cameras anymore. And when they do see one, and you have a big mouth like I do, and like to chat people up. I taught so many photography lessons on the street, especially to children. Because what's this weird old white guy doing with this big camera that you got to get under a cloak to focus? And it was a great help to me.
You said the children. That's one of the plates, I think, from like 90 on in the book. There's a lot of children in the photographs. And that was my question, is like, how did that come about? Because I love that view of seeing just children in the neighborhood doing the thing. But curiosity, I think, is maybe some of that.
It helps. And I'm not a shy guy. And I will walk up to a situation and ask if I can make a photograph. And often I'm told, no thanks, that's fine. But if they are interested, here I am, and we have a party. And my kids are included in this book. I have some photographs of my children and neighbor kids and strangers, just whoever I meet out in this little radius of the neighborhood that I photographed in. And the first plate in the book is a map that I superimposed my thumbprint on so that people know what part of the city I'm working in. And almost all the photographs could have been made within walking distance of my house. I had to drive some because of the giant cameras, but it was easy.
I love when that map to the river is highlighted extra strong. You can see that dotted line very clearly.
Well, it's funny you say that because the book designer, the book is printed in duotone, so there's no color in that book. So they needed to make the map more visible. So she used I think she used a dotted line. And that was a compromise because in the original mock-up that I gave them, I think I had drawn a blue line just to delineate it because the river is so important. But it's
well, I love some of the ghost-like compositions too of people that seem to almost be transient, almost ethereal, sort of almost floating there. Tell us a little bit about how that kind of look comes about and what that means for the book and the story of Oak Cliff in this book.
Well, that technique came out of necessity because around the early 1990s, I got a grant from the Polaroid Corporation in their artist support program, and they would give me the only film that I was using that I was interested in that they were stocking was this positive negative film, which gave you an instant positive and a negative. And so I said, yeah, I want to do this. So I'd make photographs with this material and send prints back, and then if they like the prints, they add it to the International Polaroid Collection and send me I think they sent me a case of film for every photograph they added to the collection. So I had all this film, and the problem with the Type 55 Polaroid material that I used in the 4x5 camera, it has an ISO of 20, which is very slow.
Yeah.
And it's a 4x5 film, and in a 4x5 camera, if you it's an exposure time is lengthy.
Yeah.
With that kind of deal. So I figured, well, I can't make a traditional kind of portrait with this camera and this film combination. So what I've got to do is a 3-minute exposure with additional hand flash application during the exposure. So what I would do is set the camera up. Set the scene, and open the shutter, and I'd tell my subjects, just stay where you are, don't move. And then I'd walk around with this electronic flash and pop individual people in the frame, or one or more times. Sometimes I'd lose count of how many flashes I used, but it made a photograph, the results of which are pleasing to me because it deals with the issue of time, it deals with the ephemeral nature of life itself, and this process of photography. It's a window in time. It's this moment, and I found it a very nice kind of contrast to the other work, which is more traditional. So many of the other portraits are more traditional environmental portraits or urban landscapes. So I just found it a good piece to fit in the puzzle.
Yeah, that style, we were flipping through this before the show, and I think it's the Botanica that kind of starts that off, and there's an essay on impermanence too. And I just thought that the way you visually show that philosophy and what's happening in this entire neighborhood is pretty amazing as a style, and so it felt unique when we were flipping through these shots, and you're just like, what are these ghostly figures that are kind of spending a little bit of time here, and but it's all it's not it was
permanent. Just a result of really chance, because people look at a body of work and they think it's a straight line. It's no straight. It's like your life. It's not a straight line. It's a zigzaggy, a real nasty zigzaggy. and the zigzags are defined by the decisions you make, the best decision you can make at the time. And this is something I had to do, and it was dictated by this grant and this film material and the tools I was using. So it worked.
How does it tie into the impermanence of Oak Cliff? I think that's
I think it's just transience. And it's just the impermanence of everything. Yeah. Everything is lost. This is a finite existence, and Oak Cliff also, and it's been going through changes since it was an entity back at the turn of the 20th century, and here we're still undergoing the change. It's unending. It's like the change you've seen in the technology of photography. Photography has been nothing but a study in change since 1839. As you go from all these processes forward, and here we have these digital toys that we use in our phones.
Yep.
It's changed everything, and time and technology change everything, just like the urban landscape.
What's compelling about Jefferson is it's changed some. Dallas as a whole has changed drastically and continues to evolve all the time. That's really it's part of the ethos of Dallas, is always something new construction, whatever. I think on the flip side, it's interesting that Oak Cliff has retained some of its structure, its form, especially on Jefferson, where, for many years, it's looked sort of the same, even though the faces and the businesses have changed. I just find it a really interesting street.
Jefferson's amazing. It's I feel like you and I have talked about it a ton, where it's just like I've heard the saying, "So goes Jefferson, so goes Oak Cliff,"
right.
or it's kind of the heartbeat of Oak Cliff as its own entity or neighborhood of sorts. But yeah, Jefferson's just it seems like the center almost of all this. You talked earlier about even Bishop Arts. If people look at it as like the entertainment and shopping area, but it's like, man, Oak Cliff is so big. Like there's South Oak Cliff, there's Jefferson that people don't visit. There's a lot to it, and I think that's something we've enjoyed on this show. It's just like trying to discover more and more of like what this entire neighborhood is, and so
it's interesting how much Jefferson Boulevard has not changed compared to the Bishop Arts area.
Right.
And it's changing, but very slowly. But there isn't wholesale raising of city blocks to put up ugly apartments and shop parking lots and all this stuff.
Yeah.
At least you've got in the Bishop Arts area some concerned developers that have a brain and a heart that are building architecture that echoes the original form of the early 20th century, which is what you see in, Hunky's Hamburgers, for example, on the corner of Bishop. They're a beautiful place, and a lot of people are building shops and storefronts that look like that in that style, and that's fine. The apartments are something else altogether, and if you drive around, Jiminy, it's crazy what's going on here. These apartments are thrown up as fast as they can, and they're going to be a slum in 25 years.
Yeah, Monty was talking about it on his Texas Talk, just that entire street. It's just, he used to love going up and down it, and now it's just all...
Monty Anderson?
Yeah,
he's a great guy, I mourn what's happened to the Belmont.
Yeah, we all do.
And my wife, we were driving by there today, and she said, they're just waiting for that to get to a point of deterioration where they can justify tearing it down. It breaks my heart.
Oh, yeah, there's movement every once in a while, but yeah, it does seem like it's just been defunct for a while now, and we want to all see it come back somehow. But
I mean, certainly hope that it doesn't get to the point where they tear it down. Hopefully somebody steps in before then.
Well, I think Cox Farms represents a pretty good effort to... because they're neighborhood contributors. They're good people, and they have their hearts in the right place.
Yeah. For sure. Well, Richard, I have to ask. There was a photo in the book. I'm looking at my notes. Plate 67. It's in 68. It's a Trinity River fishing and like turtle hunting or something like that. What is the story there? I was stopped, and I'm sure people are stopped by different ones, but that one was amazing. Guy has a Walmart shirt on, short shorts, and a turtle in his hand.
Yeah, he's with his daddy.
He's with his daddy.
Just out there turtle hunting. No, they told me I used to walk the Trinity River bottoms with my 4x5 camera just because I like that landscape. There's nobody ever down there. Yeah. And there's the people that are down there are interesting. I guarantee it. So I came upon these guys, and they were catching these soft shell turtles and alligators snapping turtles out of the Trinity River. I always wanted to look at what they caught, because you'd think that the turtle would have to have two heads coming out of the Trinity River. But I chatted them up, and they claimed that they were collecting these turtles for this research guy somewhere, and I went, okay, right, but I'll bet you $1 to a donut that those turtles were in the soup that night.
For sure.
But they were pretty good sized turtles.
They were huge
turtles. But that's how that came about, and they were friendly to having their photograph made. And I try to return photographs to people. If I photograph them, I try to give them print, because most people don't have that, and it's nice. It's a nice gesture, but I never heard from those guys again or saw them again, and I couldn't do that. The fisherman was just a fellow I chatted up. He was just down on the banks fishing away, and I just asked him if he was catching anything, and he said, not yet, but I will. And he was just keeping at it. And I'm fascinated by the way people use the space, the river, the city, just for their own end. It's wonderful to me, and I love talking to people.
Yeah.
When you're talking to people as you were photographing Jefferson and all of Oak Cliff, did you have any stories or people that you met that really left a big impression on you?
Well, there was a fellow that I don't think his portrait is in the book. There was a guy that ran a ceramics studio on Jefferson Boulevard, on East Jefferson Boulevard, as you head east of Beckley, and he was a man. He was probably 80 when I talked to him, and he ran this business for little old ladies who did these ceramic projects. It wasn't like a art class, but you'd have a little form, and they'd pour the clay in these forms. They were like tchotchkes and little dogs and just name it. And they would fire, they'd glaze them and fire them, and it was a great place for all these people to, sit around. And I liken it to a church group or a quilting group.
Yeah.
It gets these people together every day, and they have this great activity. And that was one story. I visited them several times just because I like to hang out there.
Yeah.
It was fun. And the man who appears, there's another man who appears in the book, Mr. Moore, who ran a meat market in Oak Cliff back in the mid 20th century. He retired and had to go back to work because he was broke, and he opened a meat market on my street in the 900 block of North Edgefield. It's now a CrossFit place called Edge Fitness.
I know exactly what you're talking about. You see my haircut
there's some rope waggers. There's some rope waggers out there, I tell you.
Yeah.
But Mr. Moore rehabbed that old gas station and made a meat market there. And my kids, we used to stop there on the walk home from Rosemont and grab a popsicle or a piece of candy or whatever. But he was a great guy to just talk to about the neighborhood. He'd been around forever. His son became a physician who's now retired. He was at Methodist Hospital.
Wow.
But it wasn't my style to use a tape recorder or to take. Didn't take notes. I don't know if I regret that or not, but I was just there because of the experience. I mean, this is just a guy wandering around photographing things that compel and interest me.
And why is I think a question I have too. One, it's in your bones to do this, but there seems to be like a deep love for this neighborhood or a discovery that you were trying to go for. Like what drove you to do some of this?
Again, it's all a labor of love. It's because I have such a close relationship with this neighborhood, the people that are here. It's my community.
Yeah.
At my age, we think a lot about relocating. My daughter's in Arizona, my son's in New Jersey, and they've got their lives. They're always asking, when you gonna move? And we've had the big discussions, but it boils down to we're gonna age in place because we love this place so much. We have the community, our friends, our landscape, and why would you want to mess that up? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's pretty special.
I did a lecture at the college that I taught for so many years. They've been badgering me to come out there and do a book signing, and so I did. And they said, "Why don't you use the digital camera? So much easier." And then it got me on my toadstool talking about, the phone photography and digital photography has ruined it because it makes it too simple. It's not a process anymore. It's just this act, and the phones make such gorgeous images.
Stunning.
Yeah.
It's bizarre, but no one learns a craft. No one really learns what the basic soul of an image is.
Just pulling it up and hitting the button is not the same as. Now I got to start photography on a film camera. I feel like I was like right before the digital cameras in like late '80s and or mid '90s of sorts. And I feel like my understanding of photography would have been completely different if it was on.
It's a different
on just raised on digital.
Yes, sir.
It would have been completely different.
It's a waggy world. I had to bridge that gap because
no kidding.
When we built, when I was hired at Tarrant County College in '82, the year we got here, I joined another guy on my hiring committee who was a Rhode Island School of Design graduate, old school art school guy. A great photographer and a very hard worker, incredibly hard worker. And he and I got to design a building for photography at 8,000 square foot building that had it was just a wet dream for a photographer
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
had we had a large format printing room with 4x5
Jeez.
enlargers. We had a 35 station, 35 millimeter medium format dark room. We had a color film room, a black and white film room, a shooting studio, a classroom, a gallery, a faculty office, and we were lucky enough to have lab assistants, a lab
Wow.
assistant's office,
Wow.
a finishing room.
Yeah.
It was incredible, and we opened that in 1988, and my colleague died in 2007, and it was left up to me then to transition to some kind of digital platform because this is what people wanted, and all over the United States programs are closing,
Yep.
classes can't fill, and you know the college is a business. You gotta fill those seats. So I designed a program that was kind of a hybrid because we still had the foundation film classes, and then we offered the digital courses on top of that. And the woman that got my professorship, she was a former student of mine and went to the San Francisco Art Institute and worked with some old school people my age, Jack Fulton and Linda Connor. She came back and got the full-time gig, and she maintains that curriculum now, which is basically the old Institute of Design, Bauhaus design thing that came out of Chicago.
Yeah.
You know, the new American Bauhaus,
Yeah.
Moholy-Nagy, and all that stuff. So that spirit is still in her, and she's carried it forward. And it's real funny because the Collin County College opened a photography program after ours did. And when the gal who started that program was designing the facility, she said, because she taught part-time for me and my colleague, and she said, I want you to look at this Tarrant County College program. She brought these architects down, and they walked around our building taking notes, and she said, I want this. And they copied our program. It was just
Seriously?
amazing, just basically taking
That's awesome.
like this.
Yeah.
And guess what happened to that program last year? They closed it. They turned the photography program from this epic, massive juggernaut into this 2-classroom digital lab where they teach their photography now. This broke my heart.
Yeah.
And one of my old friends who used to teach there, it was terrible for him. It's just the worst.
Yeah.
Do you think it's largely because students just don't have the interest like they once did in the craft?
I think if they wanted, if the people who were in charge of that program had their head screwed on right, it would be like ours is.
Yeah.
Because certainly it's not an age thing, but both these people who work up there got the itch to be administrators, and so they can make more money and sit in an office and dress up and then hire adjuncts to teach the courses, and then you don't have the investment in just the basic concepts of education.
It's a vision for it.
Yeah.
So Oak Cliff has a reputation of being an enclave of creatives, and it brings in those types of people. Have you found that to be true in the last 40 years you've been here, of rubbing shoulders with different people that...
It's really funny because in the early 1980s, the Bishop Arts area had just a couple of businesses.
Yeah.
One of them was was Caroline's hairstyling salon, where my wife got her hair done.
Love that.
And there was a printing business, I think that was on 7th Street, and there was what is now Hunky's Diner. It was just a hot plate lunch place. Bishop Street Grill,
That's what it
run
was.
by
Yeah.
Gus and his wife, and those were the only businesses there. Everything else was boarded up, and guess who was in those buildings? It was artists living there because of cheap rent and a place to work.
It's a studio
and so
space.
a lot of people, I didn't know a lot of them, but I know that those shuttered buildings had people in them living there and making work. A lot of commercial photographers, a lot of artists in there.
Actual artists in Bishop Arts.
Absolutely. And it slowly, changed.
Became shops.
It became shops and restaurants and everything else. And it's quite the thing. I guess you've seen the tour buses come in from the suburbs. Have you seen that yet?
Yeah.
Wow. The first time
Like
I
a
saw
wine
that,
tour or
it
something,
blew my
or-
mind.
yeah.
And all the people would get out and they're walking around with their phones and they think they're in the slums of Madrid and the view down the alley.
Yeah.
It's hysterical.
It's wild.
But it's just an evolution, and this is what happens. It's great in a way because they've revitalized.
Yeah.
But I do not like what's happened to the neighborhood because there's a lot of people that have been there for a long time who've been displaced.
Yeah.
You can still walk down the street from Wild Detectives, and there are people speaking Spanish on their front
Yeah.
porches, and
Yeah.
the radios are
Yeah.
on, and their driveways are blocked by these obnoxious yuppies that
Yeah.
come in for their latte, $10 latte. So it's a mixed blessing.
Yeah.
Yeah, Minutaglio, I'm going to butcher the name, but Bill Minutaglio, actually, I want to read this quote because I think it really hits on what you're saying. He said, if you expand your definition and don't limit yourself to an upscale Bishop Arts District entertainment and shopping pocket, it becomes clear that Oak Cliff has always been an outpost where multiculturalism can be saluted, embraced, and replenished. And I feel like that really captures the heart of it in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, and I think he continues on when he's talking about Jefferson and how it's gone through so many changes with white flight happening, but then immigrant businesses coming in, and it's like it is like Mexican, Nicaraguan, Honduran. There's so many hearing these different languages, but then also different people groups that are all kind of crashing into Jefferson. It's a completely beautiful mixed bag of people, and that's been Oak Cliff, it seems like, for a while. It's what drew you here, I think, and you said the 80s.
Well, yes,
and,
sir. Yes, sir.
yeah.
1983, we moved, and it's just a beautiful thing to see the whole world represented on
Yeah.
that street.
Yeah, yeah.
It's and people, realizing their dreams, their opportunities are coming to fruition there. All these bridal shops and taquerias and paletas joints and botanicas and all this stuff. It's just such a rich social fabric of the city.
Yeah, I feel like it's for people who don't know, like Jefferson Boulevard is just this long boulevard in the heart of Oak Cliff, and people just walk it. It's there's shops all up and down it, and like Richard was saying, it's amazing to see the different amounts of businesses. I mean, there's Western stores, there's botanicas, like you're saying, the quinceañera shops are every corner. It seems like it's wild, but it's an amazing spot.
Same author says there's a bubbling New York melting pot sensibility to the street, which I love. I think that's such a perfect way to describe Jefferson.
Yeah.
The last photo in your book is named Tenacity, and I think you embrace that it sort of there's a spirit to Oak Cliff of tenacious living. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and maybe what that image meant to you when you put it in there?
Sure. It was, the John Rohrbach, who wrote the essay for the book, the second, I guess his was the first essay. But before he agreed to write for me, he said, I want to come over to Oak Cliff and walk this Jefferson Boulevard with you. I want to see what you're dealing with here. Because, I've known John Rohrbach ever since he got the job at the Amon Carter Museum. He's a heavyweight curator. He's a smart man. He's written a lot of books. And I said, sure, John, come on over. So we walked Jefferson from basically Beckley all the way to the end of the business strip down past Tyler. Yeah. And he said, yeah, let's go. I'll do this. I said, this is no problem. I like this. But when I was doing the sequencing of the photographs, I had licensed. I arranged those photographs the way I wanted to, and I got licensed to do what I wanted to with the selection of the photographs. And I would send him the mock-up and ask for suggestions. I did this to what I call my brain trust, just a few people that I trusted and had knew what was going on. And his suggestion was, when he saw that photograph, Tenacity, he said, that's the only photograph in this book that has a title that's not just a place. And he said, subconsciously, this photograph speaks to your process of being on this street, in this neighborhood, making these photographs for 40 years, it also speaks to the nature of this neighborhood and how it's survived and thrived all these years. And so he said, that's the last photograph anybody needs to see in that book. And so I said, okay, that's a great idea. And
it's a photo, to describe a little bit. It's of a power line, or is it just a wire?
It's just a phone line with a branch
on it.
Is stuck in. It's a very simple photograph.
Yeah.
It
Striking.
Was extremely simple.
Yeah.
And I walked under that branch for 3 years before one day I said, I'm going to make this photograph.
Yeah.
And I went back and did, and it worked out. It worked well. You make so many. You expose so much film and make so many pictures, and you have to be careful as you put them together, because the most important part of a book is the sequence and the way one photograph speaks to its neighbor, the way a series of photographs leads into another series of photographs. And if you notice, the book is constructed in almost 3 parts. It starts out with the John's essay and some Jefferson Boulevard photographs, and then it goes into more Jefferson Boulevard photographs, and the book ends really with the portraits and those more ghostly images that Chris Blais' essay introduces. And that was intentional, because I wanted to go from the more objective to the more personal, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. Yeah, I think when people pick up a copy of this, the sequencing there's an art to it as well. The way you're talking about this, I remember one of the shots in Jefferson Boulevard. It's there's like a pin-up model in the storefront, and then there's Jesus Botanica looking at that across the spine of that, and you're just like, there's some playfulness and some forethought that went into laying out all of this, and it's impressive.
It's very important. One of my heroes coming up, unfortunately, he did a thing at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago where I got my MFA.
Yeah.
A guy named Nathan Lyons from the Visual Studies Workshop in Rochester. He was a genius, and he had a book that came out in 1974 called Notations in Passing. And that sequence of photographs, it was life-changing for me, because I saw for the first time how this works. Photography as language, photography as a visual dialogue. And that was just like bells ringing in my ears. And it's so important to understand when you present photographs, especially today when they're ubiquitous, a clear message, and you got to read a photograph like a sentence. So that's where I come from, is that very conscious conceptual base to a body of work, and then organizing it visually and trying to get people to pay attention to the little things in the photographs. At this lecture I did back at the college, one of my favorite panoramic photographs is there's a young couple on frame right, and they're holding hands. They're obviously very happy, very much in love, very much filled with that lustful young energy. And on frame left is the 3 sets of ladies' underpants. And on one of the underpants is written, "Don't ever stop." And I had to point that out to my audience at the college, because I don't think it was perceptible from the projection. But that kind of thing is important. And I try to stress to people, look, read, understand what's trying to be communicated here, because it's very conscious on the maker's part. I put this stuff here for a reason. The same thing with graffiti. The same thing with paired gestures and just contrasts. It's just the tools of the trade.
Yeah, I just the whole book reeks of intentionality. It is incredibly well thought out, and your layout to the images, and I think that's talking about even going from digital to film and all this, how ubiquitous it is. You can tell there's a cost to each of these frames, or there's a thought and a time that is put into this, and I feel like it's a gift to Oak Cliff. So everyone should go get a copy and just sit and spend some time with this book. I kind of want to end on like one of my favorite shots of this in the book. It's a looks like a couple that's it's a grandfather or someone's elderly man sitting on a curb on Edgefield, and it's this panoramic shot where so much is happening in this. He's like laughing joyfully on the curb, and then there's a woman to the right who's like maybe spraying fertilizer, or I don't know if she knew she was in the shot, or I don't know, but it was she's just kind of doing this thing, and it kind of, for those who are in the film world, feels Terrence Malick-y, just like this life of is happening here, Tree of Life kind of reference of sorts, where it's like it's incredibly visual, and it's a capture of this time, but also is fun. And so, yeah, I want people to go sit and look at this photograph, sit and look at this book, and I'm thankful that you shot this and you did this for the neighborhood.
Well, thank you. It was, again, a great pleasure, and I can't stop. I think that, as someone smarter than I once said, art is a disease, and it's terminal if you're lucky. So it's something you can't stop doing.
Richard, where can folks get the book?
Book is available everywhere in the world online, but I would recommend, if you're in the scenic Oak Cliff, go to Who's Books on Davis. Great people, family-oriented, community-oriented bookstore. Photographique is a little gallery in Bishop Arts which has it. Also, Wild Detectives, another wonderful bookstore in Oak Cliff.
That's awesome.
So again, this is Framing Oak Cliff, and you can find it, like we just said with Richard, all over Oak Cliff and online. Go get a copy of it and take a look. Thanks, Richard.
You're welcome.